What? It's 18 July 2018. This is the General Welfare Tendency. Vorwärts! So, good afternoon. I'm Kevin McFoy Dunn, and this is the General Welfare Tendency on YouTube. Come to bring you truth, as the kids say. So, let's talk actually a little bit, just at the beginning, about why again I'm doing all this. Initially, this was supposed to be sort of a standalone party, and a social democratic, a democratic socialist, whatever. Breath mint, candy mint, lefty thing. A challenge to the moribund and largely ineffective Democratic Party, at least the latter-day one. But then I had it impressed upon me that really, like it or not, at this stage of things, particularly with respect to 2018 and 2020, the duopoly really is the only game in town. That's it. And a terrible inflexibility of thought surrounds all this, because everybody's like, oh, well, you know, they can't do anything, they're sclerotic, we can't change them, you know, their arteries are clogged with big money, just like the other side. All true. All true, but faction is powerful. As a matter of fact, and we'll get back to this a little later in the show, the founders hated faction. It was naive. They wrote an entire constitution based on its absence. And it didn't work effectively. We have parties. We have two parties, as a matter of fact, who slam away at each other like the Blues and the Greens and the Hippodrome at the Nika riots, to roughly the same effect, or at least the way it's going. I trust most of you have seen the circus surrounding Trump's little Helsinki moment. I mean, honestly, would? Wouldn't? Sure. Whatever. The rhetorical sleight of hand is dazzling. I wish I could talk that good. But in any case, faction we have, and if faction, then why not faction within faction within faction? I've often thought that if we had three parties, we could actually function more like a parliamentary system, if only because it would require, ideally, a plurality center and one of the wings to get stuff done, which of course, in my thinking, would be the left party, because the right party is full of cuckoo birds who Freedom Caucus things, although some of the ideas of the Freedom Caucus are not necessarily bad from a tactical standpoint. Politically, they're garbage. Garbage concepts by garbage people. But, you know, when it involves getting down in the trenches, long knives, baby! Well, they might actually have a thing or two to teach us. And apparently, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez has some notions that way, and we'll get back to that later, too. But in any case, it was borne in on me by talking to a lot of people who are, let's say, cautious, that we really, we have no choice but to work within the framework we've got at the moment. The gerrymandering, the gerrymandering most of all, voter suppression, the electoral college, the inequities built into the senatorial system associated with that, just, this is all there is right now. So therefore, battles need to be waged within parties in order to get things done. And again, the Republicans have in some way led the way on this. So, here comes 2020. What gets done? Well, there's a number that I would like you to contemplate. You will be seeing it momentarily. As a matter of fact, you're seeing it now. 753. Those of you with a little bit of classical education will be having your ears pricking up a little bit now, because that should sound familiar. 753 BC, the foundation of the city of Rome. Which is why I picked this number, because some people, like me, will be able to remember it easier than some other more logical number, which is the number of superdelegates to the Democratic National Convention. Now, before I go on with that, it is, I am given to understand, the case that reform rules are about ready to be passed for the National Committee, and the power of the superdelegates, in some way I have yet to research adequately, yeah, so I'll get back to you on this, is going to be reduced. So the 753 that I selected as a number that was at minimum able to just more than cancel them out by 10 or 15 delegates is way larger than necessary, but let's go with it for now, because, you know, aberbe condita and all that. General welfare, I'd like to function as a clearinghouse for a more, how shall I say, communitarian, almost congregational form of managing the selection of the presidential candidate. So I figured the other day, to the fact that something like 65% of voters generally and 70-something% of Democrats want a fresh face. Okay, this is fresh face land. Fresh food. It's fresh. Sure, they want that. They're probably wrong. A fresh idea would be superior to a fresh face any old day. I'm not entirely sure that somebody as superannuated as myself, or even older, I can think of two names right now, and one is really, really prominent, and one got prominent relatively recently, at least nationally, in the 2016 campaign, but whatever, I don't care. Idea is what counts. But anyway, here's the mechanism. This is the idea I conceive. If you could get a gaggle of leftists in the Democratic Party, or prepared to do whatever is required to ally themselves with the Democratic Party, officially, could get it together to just accumulate 753 delegates under the aegis of, let's call it, I think I went into this on the very first episode, 25 presidential candidates, everybody eligible by age, which lets out Ocasio-Cortez, which is unfortunate, but it doesn't really matter who the candidates are. And incidentally, at least as the rules were written, as I understand them right now, you can't be a favorite son, favorite child, favorite son they used to call it back in the bad old days. You can't just run in one state. You have to be on the ballot in at least 2 states. So, and I'm taking states literally. I don't know what the situation is with territories. So, 25 candidates. The idea is to accumulate among those 25 candidates. To accumulate among those 25 candidates, the requisite number of delegates, and then on the first ballot, turn them loose, let them go. And brokered the convention on the floor. No smoke-filled rooms. No smoke of any sort, indeed. At least not on the floor. And make the candidates truly make their cases. Make them negotiate through the platform committee something as close to binding pledges as you can put together in a regime that is just this side of puffery and equally actionable when lies are told. Make them be in a position to have to be won. I think it was the Post put out a list of possible candidates a couple of weeks ago or something. I don't remember where. In any case, it has something on the order of like 30 plus names. Biden was on there. Bernie, of course. I presume Harris and Holder and oh gosh, who all else? Oh, Gillibrand, of course, Gillibrand. The suspiciously suddenly progressive Gillibrand. They're all on there. God knows who all else is on. I haven't even seen the list. I read it in another piece. There's a lot to read these days. And I'm a one-guy research team as of now, so I know what I know. But does it matter if you can get some people to sign off on a particular set of ideas, some notions? Sort of like, well, you know, this is the mission statement of general welfare. And you'll notice that it's headed a little provocatively. It's free stuff and no war. Yeah. And I wrote this for teenagers. I mentioned it in the first show. I don't think I read it, and so now I'm going to. And then we'll chat about where we're going with this. Let's see. Free stuff and no war. A short introduction to general welfare. Alright, that header admittedly offers a humorous abbreviation of what this social democratic movement, the name of which is taken from the preamble of the Constitution of the United States, stands for. But it's not far off the mark. Operating from the premises A, that no member of our common species may be consigned to immiseration and humiliation by the action of society as expressed through the state, and B, that each human being is of intrinsic and in some sort compensable value to every other as reciprocal objects of knowledge. Operating from these premises, general welfare supports the provision by all available means, private or public or in combination, of health care, education, housing, and income support and augmentation as primary and indefeasible social goods. For the view of a founder of the American Republic on this issue, with special reference to money and the means of production, see Benjamin Franklin's letter to Robert Morris at blah blah blah. We'll put the URL up later. You can also find it on the general welfare pages here and there. Etc. The position of general welfare is that to assure equal access for all citizens to a decent and effective minimum of the enumerated social goods is a legitimate function of government to be effected through levels of taxation appropriate to fulfilling these ends. And if I may say so, I heard someone call it once, and not meaning it in a nice way, taxation socialism. That's pretty much what it is. I'm happy to live with that label. In any case, the mission statement goes on. General welfare also seeks, for purposes both of elevating ethical relations among nations and of funding the above proposed social spending, to end preparation for and engagement in expeditionary warfare, such as was seen in the disastrous Iraq campaign of 2003. reducing by half a military imprudently enlarged to pursue unjust and unwise objectives and dedicating it virtually exclusively to defense of the nation's territory proper would make possible implementation of domestic programs such as are explicit in general welfare's principles without insubordinable or exorbitant increases in revenue collection. To conclude this brief survey, it should be noted that the most expansive precepts of human and civil rights, the most stringent principles of consumer and environmental protection, and the most aggressive advocacy of those rights and protections should, under the precepts of general welfare, be especial concerns of government. Boom, the end. That's it. It's really short. It's not long. And the idea is to unite 25 basically stalking horse candidates under this banner, with the view, under this banner and under this statement, this declaration, this statement of principles, mission, blah, 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 whatever you want to call it, the general idea of general welfare. And at the convention, with a large, maybe not decisively large, anything over 700 sounds pretty good to me, bunch of delegates basically wander around from candidate to candidate and say, well, now, it may be objected, geez, dude, you have no idea how a national party organization or its convention works. That's not entirely untrue. I don't. I'm about the idea. I don't really care about the mechanism. As a matter of fact, I'm about the core, absolute deep core of this thing, more than I am about any other aspect of it, although I am kind of hot about the no war stuff. Maybe I should devote a moment or two to that. But no member of our common species may be consigned to immiseration and humiliation by the action of society as expressed through the state. In other words, your shopping center is not worth starving and rendering ignorant and consigning to living under the viaduct or being mighty damn close to it every day. It's just not worth it. You can have your shopping center, you can have your private property, you can have your plant, you can have things with your name stamped on them in gold, really big letters in gold. Fine. It's just eat your vegetables, pay your taxes. Franklin's term in the letter to Morris was the quaint 18th century saying that gave us the word originally, pay your club, i.e. your dues. They became conflated over time. It's a pretty simple idea, and as of right now, I truly believe that you would be hard-pressed to find a Democratic crypto candidate for the presidency. Of course, everybody's focused on 2018. Nobody's wanting to say too much about 2020 because they just want to try to get the legislature back. And good luck to them. I'm all for it. If you do not go out and vote for a Democrat, wherever you are hearing my voice today, you are simply a suicidal imbecile. So don't be a suicidal imbecile. It's a bad look. You should truly, deeply, abidingly go vote for Democrats in 18 and 20 for that matter. But let's try to get somebody we really want to vote for. Let's try to get somebody who's maybe not got a reputation of being in the pocket of Goldman Sachs or in the pocket of KBR or corporations generally. This will be hard because the Democratic Party is addicted to big money. American politics is addicted to big money. And thanks to Citizens United, nobody has any particular reason to kick the habit, because there's going to be a good bit of you first, no, you first, no, you first on this topic. And I understand that unilateral disarmament in the money department is a pretty risky proposition, although the marginal slash swing vote is shrinking. Persuasion among likely voters is rapidly approaching the point of diminishing returns. There's only so much persuadability, so much give left in the 130 million, give or take, that turned out to vote in 2016. All of the activity for 2020, certainly 2018 to some degree, is going to have to come from people who, for whatever reason, have never voted, don't know how to vote, are afraid to vote, may be disenfranchised from voting by reason of their inability to get together the money and the cab fare to go, and the documentation to get an ID so they can go vote, which is of course the primary modus of disenfranchising voters, particularly first-time voters right now. This is where all the activity is going to come from, and that core of voters is disproportionately young, poor, and or dark. And it's, if you just cut out for drill 30% of them, just because, just do it, just cut them out. That leaves 70 million. Of that, it seems to me that you could get a little over a quarter to come vote for their own interest. It's a truism, over and over again from us. They vote against their own interests. There are a lot of reasons for this. The analysis of, what shall I say, concrete material, quantifiable interests is not well developed. Quantification is taught, but interpreting what the quantification yields in terms of social meaning are it leaves something to be desired, and I dare say the Kochs and the Mercers are very happy with that. They want you to be able to perform the quantification that is useful to them, not apply it someplace else as in some way that might be useful to you on your own terms. Now, I scarcely know a person that isn't capable of doing the kind of social calculus that I describe. That's not representative of a lot of the self-disenfranchised. And that's going to have to change, and I honestly believe that suggesting to people that the radical, you want to talk about radical, the radical insecurity that's been sold them as a virtue and a necessity in their daily lives, all of which are purely a function of the increasing sequestering of every single factor of human life under the aegis of somebody's private property. They rioted in Dublin when they tried to get them to pay for water. In Dublin, you open the tap, water comes out. It's paid for with, money. But that's one department of human life that a determination was made that, if you have a pipe, you should be able to get some clean water out of it. Simple enough. Right now, going to do my little Marco bit again. I'm going to have a drink of my favorite beverage. Coca-Cola. It's tasty. It's not so tasty in Chiapas, in the little town of San Cristobal, where a giant Coke plant bulks over the town. I got this story from the irreplaceable, sublime Charlie Pierce over at Esquire. They take 300,000 gallons a day out of the water table, and for a variety of reasons, including advertising that has appealed to certain aspects of Maya Tzotzil culture, it's practically become a sort of sacrament. It's also cheaper than water, and consequently the diabetes rates in Chiapas have spiked. I was told by reasonably lefty sources some months ago that Coca-Cola was touting having achieved a level of return to the community above what it took out, and not San Cristobal particularly, but worldwide, in terms of water used in production. Again, apparently not the case in San Cristobal. Pierce pointed all this up in the context of what he says are the coming water wars, which will be, the wars over oil will be as nothing by comparison, which makes sense because no oil, the car doesn't go, no water, you die. But in the United States, you can be denied medical care or get it so late that it's no good, so they can they can just put you in hospice. That's actually a lot cheaper. We just want candidates will basically say this is wrong. You can't not let people have water. You can't let people sleep under the viaduct. Why are there homeless people in the United States of America? Do you ever watch Formula One? I do. Formula One is it is my touchstone for why I am not envious of wealth. Monaco, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, whatever. A lot of the courses for the races are adjacent to marinas. Maybe you don't keep up with rich people that much. I don't, honestly, but F1 being the quintessential rich man sport, with the possible exception of Elon Musk sending up rockets because it's fun. So money is there. Money is there on display. You can see all the money you ever want to see. There are boats the size of small islands there in the harbors. It's fairly astonishing. There's a lot of money sloshing around on the planet. Vast amounts of it. A lot of it's sloshing inside closed reservoirs that nobody can get to for any purpose. It's just sitting there. Piketty went into a lot of detail about that. It's been disputed. You can dispute it, I suppose. But it's possible to let everyone go to the doctor. Speaking of going to the doctor, Obama gave a speech in Johannesburg yesterday, which has excited some comment. He, among other things, well, I mean, he snarked at Trump obliquely, but among other things, he actually gave something of a shout out to one of my favorite topics, the UBI or UMI, whatever you want to call it, the Universal Income, Basic Minimum, which I believe it was Felix Salmon had unkind words for in Slate this week. Won't cure poverty. Really. Well, when Jesus said the poor you always have with you, I believe it was a reproach, not a recommendation or a description. But be that as it may, the money's there. Expeditionary warfare and preparation for it sucks a lot of it out of the social pool. But it can recirculate. It can achieve different shapes. It doesn't require this particular model. Exchange is possible on terms other than the ones we have now. It's always been one of my favorite tiresome little metaphors. That Egyptian culture lasted 3,000 years and was built on tombs. You had to feed the workers who built the tombs and painted the frescoes and entertained the people who built the tombs and painted the frescoes. And an entire economy branched out from this one central imperative that you needed to create for anyone who could afford it some level of access to the eschaton. Those Ushabtu figures weren't gonna, make themselves. Somebody had to work for you in the afterlife. How much did the guy who made the surrogate, little clay surrogates for the poor people, how many did they have? Entire universes of detail inform this culture, which had to feed people, had to house them, had to get them to the doctor, admittedly to bash a hole in their skull to let the pressure out, which was often enough characterized as demonic possession. But you take the point. You can make choices about how you're going to dispose the business of going about the work of the human species. Of course, there's a wrinkle now, which is the non-human modality. I'm sure there are those who are living for the day, and within possible reach of my voice, wishing that there were a non-human intelligent species that we made, and I won't go into that a lot, but let me tell you, dream on, there will never be hard artificial intelligence. And maybe someday when we have all our Skype stuff up and working and we're talking, maybe we can talk about that. But right now, we do have awesome machines that put together cars and microwaves and smaller and smaller components of whatever device you're watching this on, and putting people out of work. Went to a kiosk at McDonald's, made the order myself. My interaction with humans, there were quite a number of humans there. They were all mostly putting together the orders, much of which seemed to be coming out of machines. all those people who would have been taking my order before, they're not there anymore. In the drive-in, they're working on the order kiosks right now. Just press. Don't talk to that person at the window, which, given the level of the intercoms, is not a bad thing, because I have, in indecision, frustrated more than one order taker through the drive-in, which, incidentally, I should not go through the drive-through, and neither should you. Petrochemicals, honestly, combustion, boom, carbon dioxide. So that's my little environmental soapbox for the day. Back to the 753. This is, or something like it. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be this idea. I like the accumulating of delegates that aren't bound to anybody notion a lot. I would like to see somebody try to adapt that. It's free, take it. You know, you're free to take this notion and incorporate it into your manifesto if you like. I don't care who does this. I just want to see it done. There is no reason for the amount of cruelty on display in American life right now. And we know where it's coming from in some measure. We know what the purposes are. Maybe not today, but the economist Buchanan is totally going to get a long segment. As a matter of fact, Nancy McLean, who wrote the book on him, is on my short list of people I would really like to get on this webcast as a guest. I read a review of the book that suggested that Buchanan was the sort of thing that after you, this was the writer's words, not mine, after you had absorbed the relatively sunny view of Ayn Rand, then they turn you loose on reading Buchanan. And, you know, Pareto is like nothing by comparison. It's just a general description of how those who have a little more oomph somehow or other manage to get to the front of the queue. By comparison, the darkness of Buchanan is just scarcely describable in short compass. But I will tell you this, at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, David Koch discovered him, and part of the plummeting spiral that we're in right now with respect to the analysis of public goods is owing to his mesmerization by this vicious man's philosophy. It is just how someone can be that certain about an opinion simply to the point that the vast majority of humankind is consigned to an annoying worthlessness. It just beggars description. I won't go into any more detail about it because my research is a little underdone at the moment, but suffice it to say that he was an economist, and whatever his technical accomplishments were, and Mises had technical accomplishments of some level, although, isn't it odd how, by and large, economics is mostly a retrospective historical enterprise? It's really kind of a species of cliometrics, more than it is a science. But of course it gets the laurel of science is settled on its brow because it has quantificationist elements. And in a society where no one, hardly, is trained in any way in letters, in the traditional adornments. They're not even really adornments. They're necessary elements of the thought of the citizen. History, philosophy, and the literature, certainly of the culture from which you're from, and in conjunction with that, the literature, philosophy, and history of the rest of the planet. These are essential to citizenship, and I'm sure Mr. Buchanan and Mr. Koch. Mr. Koch, isn't he? One of the Kochs underwrites Nova now, which I found interesting because it seems to me that in the years since I at least started noticing the logo at the beginning with the sponsors, science's engagement in unraveling culture, past cultures, Egyptians, for instance, used to be a lot of that. It seems to have dropped off a lot. There's lots of engineering chatted about these days, and rather less about mummification techniques. Let alone, the legal codes that help certain large empires run a good bit of the known part of the so-called old world. But, yes, the Kochs, the Mercers. I understand that actually there's a little bit of bother with Mr. Mercer at the moment because apparently they gave an awful lot of money to John Bolton's PAC. And I'll just pause for a second to ask, why does John Bolton have a PAC? He's not running for anything. I guess it's part of it. He's one of the ones that they keep around for honesty in PACs to say, look, he's not standing for office. He really, truly believes in his view of a strong America here in the Huntingtonian clash of civilizations. Boo-hoo. Well, anyway, so he got like $6 million from Mercer, and Mercer basically got 1 point something, 1.6, I think, back from Bolton because he bought the stuff from Cambridge Analytica. Lol, that's pretty good. They're out of business now, but that 1.6 million bucks went right back to Mercer, I'd wager. But what, Trump spent 70,000 bucks of the taxpayers' money on himself, going back to himself while he was at Turnberry in Scotland. I think that was in Scotland. Must be. All the golf's in Scotland. I mean, great. Those are the courses you hear about. God, because I'm not a golf guy, so I'm a Formula One guy. That's where I get my jollies from, the rich folks. But yeah, it's just astonishing. It's the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing business is very effective. And if you have basically concluded that your mission in life is to keep every penny you make as if those pennies were something other than transient markers in a flow of dynamic elements whose force alters depending upon that which is taken from or communicated to all the adjacent elements. Now, if you look at it as basically gold, kine, and slaves, then a lot of what they do makes sense. Except it's now a culture that has robots and travel to the other side of the planet in 18 hours. And just go on and list things. Actually, in the matter of medicine, it was pointed out to me today by a clever person on the production team that one aspect of healthcare that we forget about, because it's not there, at least explicitly, in any of the New Deal stuff. No national health service of any sort was contemplated. Clinics in utterly unserved places came into existence through the WPA and associated programs during the Depression, but nothing like Medicare was contemplated, for instance. Social Security was, as we have seen in the assault on it since it was instituted, practically a bridge too far. But really, medicine in 1940 was pretty much leeches and moxibustion compared to what we have now. And it goes again to Emma Rothschild's analysis of Adam Smith's pronouncements on the decent linen shirt. Things change. It's why originalism in constitutional analysis is, if you allow for the functioning of the axiom lex asinum est, the law is an ass, a beast of burden that will bear what you can put on it until its back breaks. The decent linen shirt is a matter of necessity for the 18th century worker. He cannot present himself to an employer without it. So things have changed. The original form has altered. Just like with the Constitution. Which actually that gets us back to an earlier topic. The issue of hang on a sec. I had it very clearly. Yeah. Well, no, you know, it's going to happen when you're ad-libbing. That just went away. I'm going to move on to a topic that has occurred to me. I have a quotes file I keep around, a commonplace book, as it were, and wanted to roll one out today. It's by the literary critic Terry Eagleton, one of the primary exponents of and latter-day critics of literary theory, particularly as was practiced in the period of the 70s through the 90s. A humane man, a socialist, a Christian, Episcopalian, if I'm not mistaken, might be Catholic, I'm not sure, somewhere in there, one of the Sacramental Confessions. He wrote this, in of all things, an article on the death and surrounding brouhaha of Michael Jackson. And it says a lot about the notion of pity that's built into the concept of the community. The old Neanderthal man with a twisted spine, who obviously had to have been carried everywhere to have attained the age he did, because he was never mobile, or not for long. In any case, I can't remember whether it was congenital or not. I think it was congenital. But he lived to a pretty considerable age, so there is a human propensity to care for those who cannot care for themselves. Anyway, Eagleton wrote, "If the U.S. sanitizes death, it is because mortality is incompatible with capitalism. Capital accumulation goes on forever, in love with the dream of infinity. The myth of eternal progress is just a horizontalized form of heaven. Socialism, by contrast, is not about reaching for the stars but returning us to Earth. It is about building a politics on a recognition of human frailty and finitude. As such, it is a politics which embraces the reality of failure, suffering, and death, as opposed to one for which the word can't is almost as intolerable as the word communist. So, there you have it. The general welfare program is based on this notion. And 5,000 years of human spiritual thinking. One won't say religious, necessarily. And boy, I know, it's religious, spiritual. Breath make candy man. There are a lot of distinctions that don't make any difference. That one makes a sort of difference, although I, for one, as a, in some senses, conventionally religious person, don't really see it. I suppose it's a function of organization or not organization, but be that as it may. Later thought that was consciously trying to free itself from the strictures of the metaphysical and the received, such as characterized the Enlightenment, arrived at very similar conclusions, mostly because they had simply inherited them from the earlier religiously structured forms. So, I don't know. There's a lot to be said still. But as for now, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we will be back with you at the top of the hour. This is The General Welfare Tendency on YouTube. And we're back. Must have read 3 articles today on, and I have mentioned her myself a couple of times on the show. The phenom, the new kid in the bullpen, the great not Anglo-Saxon hope, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York's Great 14th, the Fighting 14th. Remember when Colbert used to do that? Lol, that was fun. Better know a district. She is tearing up the pea patch, as we say down here in the South. Got Joe Lieberman scared, apparently. And again, Charlie Pierce brought this up. I will Fiorello LaGuardia you on that one. Assuming I can actually get this up. Hey, God, let's see. All right, now let's go back there, shall we? All right. Just dawned on me that I am way behind on my updating here. Yeah, here we go. It would appear that let's see. Oh gracious. Oh my. I just skimmed this. I just found out that Lieberman outgassed on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. So, you know that's got to be good for laughs. But, behind a paywall. Never mind that. Yes. Oh my. Yeah, he's upset. Well, good, says Charlie Pierce, and good, says me. But let's move on to slightly more substantial stuff. Incidentally, there are 2 women that I can talk about right now, and one is, I guess, sort of the opposite of Ocasio-Cortez, which would namely be Maria Butina. She's an interesting piece of work. Actually don't have that much to say about her, but I do want to point something out to you. She's a gun rights advocate from Russia. Have you met Russia? Do you think, you know, and I know that anybody who's actually listening to me at the moment, which will be 5 people who know me personally, you've already thought about this yourself, but just in case anybody else is tuning in, let me make this clear to you. The citizenry of the Russian Federation is not encouraged to have firearms, like radically discouraged, like not allowed. You have no fundamental right to a weapon. I suppose you can get one and keep it if you're rich enough to where you can do anything you want to anyway. Okay? But no, she's not over there advocating for being able to have your very own AR-15 or, I guess, a Kalashnikov, although they don't make those anymore, I don't think. I think that's sort of a third world cottage industry now, because it is the world's simplest semi-automatic weapon. That thing will... You've heard the stories. Bury them in mud for 6 years, take them out, clean them up, and it shoots as well as it ever did. Wish to say not very, but it's not there for accuracy. It's there to cut people in half. So, you know, not bad. But in Russia, no. You don't get to have one. So the John Bolton figures prominently in this one too, speaking of which. But anyway, yeah, Maria Butina, all indicted and all. I hope she has something to say, but, you know, who knows whether she'll survive to trial any better than Manafort will. I'm still not betting on Manafort, particularly since they moved him into Alexandria or wherever, who was foolish enough to ask to be moved, and then realized that he wasn't going to get that extension cord. So anyway, on to the other, completely other end of the spectrum. It would appear that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez has suggested that it would not, and I alluded to this earlier, it would not be the worst idea in the world if there existed something not dissimilar to a Freedom Caucus among the Democrats, except on the left. Oh, the comments. Lordy, the comments. You, really just had to behold it. And I seem to have a picture of a squirrel stuck on my screen. Do forgive me. Let's straighten that out. Come on. Beat it, squirrel. Well. You know, it just never fails. You will forgive me for a second. Anyway, the comments were most extraordinarily displeased, shall we say, at the prospect that a Freedom Caucus could rear its ugly head among the Democrats. One reasonable objection was that the Republican Freedom Caucus effectively painted them into corners over and over and over again, from which they could not extricate themselves. They made merely dramatic demands that weren't going to be met. Of course, they kind of, once they just got control of both houses, they kind of shut up, or at least became less effective, because they really didn't need them anymore to affect the obstruction that was required to make sure that basically nothing of any great import got done during the Obama administration. Like, you know, having hearings on Merrick Garland. That was impossible, let alone anything else. Although they did have to pretty much swallow the Affordable Care Act for a while. But, yes, the comments were just horrified, for the most part, that someone would think that the left of the party should get together and try to express itself. Now, and they're the usual demurs that boil down to, you're gonna lose us the election because you're commies. And this is it a legitimate complaint? I don't know. Again, my argument is that the 50 million that are basically, in my estimation, already lost, what difference does it make? Alienate them more? Make them, you know, increasingly apoplectic and furious that someone simply does not agree with them? They're